Welcome to HOA Violation Vault. This one escalated fast in the front yard. Barbara pointed at a single survey stake and screamed that touching it meant tampering and instant fines. "You are going to stop wasting your own time," she said, her key ring jingling as she stabbed her finger toward the metal rod sticking 6 inches out of the dirt. I stood there with my car key fob still clenched in my fist, watching her face go red under the afternoon sun. The surveyor had driven the stake 20 minutes ago, marked the actual property line, and walked back to his truck to log coordinates. Barbara had appeared the moment he pulled away, like she had been watching from her window 3 houses down, waiting for me to do something she could spin into a violation. I live in Albany, work as a realtor who knows these Rosewood Village Association rules better than most board members, and right now I am staring at the vice chair of the Design Review Board, who blocks approvals out of spite. My fence replacement permit came through 2 weeks ago, after a 6-month fight over height, style, setback, and whether the old rotted panels qualified as grandfathered. I thought I had won. I was wrong. "Barbara does not negotiate with violations," she said, and that is the second time I have heard that line today. The first time was 40 minutes ago when she left a voicemail claiming my contractor parking violated guest space rules. Now she is claiming the survey stake itself is intimidation because it is visible from the sidewalk and might scare children or confuse delivery drivers. The HOA claims the fine schedule changes at the first of the month and the deadline is tomorrow. That means if I do not pull the stake, agree to her demands, and submit new drawings by midnight, the violation jumps from $50 to $250, then compounds daily. I asked her how a survey stake required by the city permit office could be intimidation. She said intent does not matter. Visible enforcement tools create hostile environments, and the board voted this morning to treat all boundary markers as unapproved structures unless pre-cleared in writing. I asked when that vote happened. She said the meeting minutes are not public until they are ratified, which happens next month, so I will just have to trust her. She pulled a handheld label maker from her cardigan pocket and started printing a sticker. I could not read the text from where I stood, but I knew what it said because she has done this before. She tags materials as violations, sticks the labels on fence panels, mailboxes, gutters, anything she wants gone, and then photographs them as proof of non-compliance. She peeled the sticker, walked to the stake, and pressed it on. I did not touch her. I did not move. I just said I would be filing a formal objection and requesting the meeting recording under open records. She laughed and said the association does not record design review sessions because they are working meetings, not official board votes, so there is nothing to request. I felt my jaw tighten. I work nights sometimes, showing properties to clients with tight schedules, and gate access or parking harassment could get me fired if I miss showings. Barbara knows this. She has used it before. Last year, she tried to tow my car during a listing appointment because I parked in a guest spot she claimed was reserved for a phantom board meeting that never appeared on the calendar. I proved the meeting did not exist, got my car back, and thought that was the end. It was not. She has been waiting for another opening, and a fence replacement with visible stakes and contractor trucks is perfect. The gate latch and padlock dangling from a chain on my side yard caught my eye. The contractor installed it yesterday so he could access the backyard without walking through the house. Barbara followed my gaze, smiled, and said unapproved gate hardware is another violation, and she will be adding it to the notice. I asked if she had measured the fence height yet, or if she was just inventing problems. She said she does not need to measure because the plans I submitted show the fence at 6 feet, and the rules cap residential privacy fences at 5.5 unless the board grants a variance, which they did not because I refused to attend the hearing she scheduled on a day I told her I had a closing. That hearing happened 3 weeks ago. I missed it because I was signing paperwork with a buyer in Schenectady, and I notified Barbara by email the day she sent the hearing notice. She claimed she never received my email, never checked her spam folder, and the board interpreted my absence as abandonment of the variance request. I pulled my phone, opened my sent folder, and showed her the email with the read receipt. She glanced at it and said read receipts are not enforceable, and maybe I should have called or shown up in person if I cared about my property. A neighbor I thought was neutral, the guy 2 doors down who always waves and borrows my ladder, walked past on the sidewalk and slowed. Barbara waved at him. He waved back and kept walking, but I saw him pull his phone and start typing. Later, I would find out he had been feeding Barbara updates on my contractor schedule, my truck arrivals, my gate installs, everything. He thought he was helping keep the neighborhood clean. He did not realize he was helping her build a harassment file. Barbara said the city permit does not override HOA design standards, and I should have known that when I bought in Rosewood Village. I said the city permit explicitly references the HOA approval I got 6 months ago. She said that approval was conditional and expired when I did not break ground within 90 days. I said I broke ground 70 days after approval, and I have photos of the first post hole. She said photos are not the same as inspections, and the board requires third-party verification of start dates, which I did not provide, so the permit lapsed, and everything I have done since is unpermitted work. I asked if she was saying the city permit is invalid. She said no, the city permit is valid, but the HOA approval is not, so the city permit applies to a project that violates HOA rules, which means the city is authorizing a violation, which means I am liable for proceeding under false pretenses. I asked if she understood that made no sense. She said it makes perfect sense and maybe I should hire a lawyer if I am confused. I said I am not confused. I am just watching you create a paper trail that is going to collapse the moment anyone checks the timestamps. She smiled and said timestamps are easy to fake, and the board trusts her records over mine. My next-door neighbor, the calm woman who is tired of Barbara and has been documenting HOA overreach for 2 years, stepped out of her front door and walked over. Her name is Angela. She is a paralegal. She has filed 3 complaints against the board for violating open meeting statutes and won twice. Barbara saw her coming, and her smile faded. Angela said hello, asked what was happening, and I gave her the summary. Angela looked at the survey stake, looked at Barbara, and said surveyor stakes are required by city code for any fence replacement, and removing them is tampering with a legal land survey, which is a misdemeanor. Barbara said the stake is not being removed, it is being relocated to a less visible position, and that is not tampering, it is reasonable accommodation. Angela said reasonable accommodation for what? And Barbara said for neighborhood aesthetics and safety. Angela asked if the board had adopted a policy on survey stake visibility. Barbara said the board does not need a formal policy. Design Review Authority covers all visible improvements, and stakes are improvements. Angela said stakes are temporary surveying tools, not improvements, and treating them as structures is a misreading of the covenants. Barbara said Angela is not on the board, does not vote, and has no authority to interpret covenants. Angela pulled her phone and started recording. Barbara said recording without consent is illegal. Angela said New York is a one-party consent state, and I am a party to this conversation, so the recording is legal. Barbara said fine, record whatever you want, but the violation notice is still being filed, and the fine schedule still applies. Angela asked if Barbara had submitted a formal complaint to the Architectural Review Committee before issuing the notice. Barbara said she is the vice chair of Design Review, so her complaint is inherently formal. Angela said the covenants require written complaints with photo evidence and a 7-day cure period before fines. Barbara said that rule applies to homeowners, not board members. Angela said the covenants do not distinguish between homeowners and board members in the complaint process. Barbara turned back to me and said I have until midnight to pull the stake, cancel the contractor, and submit revised plans that show the fence at 5.5 feet with no variances. I said the contractor is coming back in 2 hours to set posts, and I am not stopping him. Barbara said if he sets posts, she will call the county zoning office and report unpermitted work. I said the work is permitted, I have the signed approval in my truck, and you can call whoever you want. She said the county does not care about HOA approvals, they only care about setbacks and easements, and she is going to tell them my fence violates the drainage easement in the back corner. I asked what drainage easement. She said the easement that runs along the rear property line, the one that is marked on the plat, the one I am ignoring. I said there is no drainage easement on my lot. The plat shows the easement 2 lots over, and I have the surveyor report to prove it. She said surveyor reports are not binding, and the county will side with the HOA because the HOA has been here longer and has better records. I said the county sides with recorded plats, not HOA claims, and if she calls them, they are going to tell her the same thing I am telling her now, which is that she is wrong, and she is wasting everyone's time. She stepped closer. Her key ring jingled. She said, I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink. I stayed polite, because polite makes bullies careless, and I said that is an interesting threat. I will make sure to include it in my complaint. She said I can complain all I want, the board does not investigate board members, and even if they did, I have no proof of anything. I said I have Angela's recording, I have my email timestamps, I have the surveyor coordinates, and I have a city permit that says you are interfering with legal work. She said none of that matters because the board votes as a block, and they will side with her over me every single time. Angela said Barbara just admitted to board collusion and that is a violation of fiduciary duty. Barbara ignored her and walked back to her car. She got in, started the engine, and sat there for a minute, typing on her phone. Then she backed out and drove off. Angela said I should file a formal complaint with the management company tonight and request an emergency hearing. I said the management company does not do emergency hearings unless there is property damage or safety risk. Angela said then make it a safety risk. Say the HOA is threatening to interfere with permitted construction, and that creates liability for the county if someone gets hurt because the contractor stops mid-job. I thanked her and went inside. I pulled the permit file, the surveyor report, the email thread with Barbara, and the original HOA approval letter. I scanned everything into one PDF, wrote a complaint that summarized the timeline, and sent it to the management company with a request for a hearing within 7 days. I copied the board president, the treasurer, and the county zoning office. I did not expect a response before Monday. I got one in 40 minutes. The management company said they had received multiple complaints about my fence project and needed to schedule a site inspection before they could calendar a hearing. I asked who else complained. They said complaints are confidential. I said confidentiality does not apply when the complaints are false and being used to delay legal work. They said they would schedule the inspection and get back to me. The contractor called. His name is Miguel. He does fences, decks, and retaining walls all over the Capital District. He said he just got a call from someone claiming to be with the Rosewood Village Board, telling him my permit is under dispute and he should stop work until it is resolved. I asked if the caller gave a name. He said no, just said she was calling on behalf of the board and the HOA would not be responsible for any costs if he proceeded. I told him the permit is valid. The HOA has no authority to stop city-permitted work, and if he wants proof, I can send him the permit and the surveyor report right now. He said he believes me, but he does not want to get caught in an HOA fight and lose other jobs in the neighborhood, because a board member spreads the word that he ignores complaints. I said I understand, but if you walk away now, I am stuck with a half-dug yard, no fence, and a fine schedule that triples tomorrow. He said he will come back, set the posts, and finish the job, but if the HOA tries to block him on site, he is leaving. I said deal. He hung up. I looked out the window. The survey stake was still there, labeled and photographed, waiting to be used as evidence in whatever hearing Barbara was planning. 2 hours later, Miguel showed up with his crew. They unloaded posts, bags of concrete mix, a post hole digger, and a string line spool. Miguel walked the property line, checked the survey stakes, and started measuring setbacks. I stood on the porch and watched. Barbara did not show. Her neighbor Spy did, though. He walked past twice, phone out, filming. The second time, Miguel saw him and asked if he had a problem. The neighbor said no problem, just documenting activity for the HOA. Miguel said the HOA does not pay him, I do, and if he wants to film, he can do it from the sidewalk, not my driveway. The neighbor backed up, stayed on the sidewalk, and kept filming. Miguel dug the first post hole. The dirt was clay-heavy and packed hard. He hit rock 8 inches down and had to switch to a breaker bar. The noise brought another neighbor out, an older guy who lives across the street and serves on the landscape committee. He walked over and said the noise ordinance kicks in at 7, and it is 6:50 now, so Miguel has 10 minutes. I said the noise ordinance allows construction until 8 on weekdays, and it is Wednesday. He said the HOA has a stricter rule, 7 on weekdays, and if we go past 7, he is calling the county. Miguel looked at me. I said ignore him. The county does not enforce HOA rules, and we are not breaking any laws. The landscape committee guy walked away, pulled his phone, and made a call. 5 minutes later, a county sheriff deputy pulled up. He got out, walked over, and asked what was going on. I explained the permit, the survey, the fence replacement. He asked to see the permit. I handed it over. He looked at it, handed it back, and asked if there was a noise complaint. I said yes, but the complaint is false. We are within legal hours, and the HOA is trying to stop permitted work. He said he is not here to mediate HOA disputes. He is here to check if we are violating county noise rules. And we are not. So he is leaving. He told the landscape guy the same thing, got back in his cruiser, and drove off. Barbara called my phone. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. She said the board is holding an emergency session tonight at 8, and I am required to attend or my permit will be revoked. I called Angela. I said Barbara just claimed the board is meeting tonight and revoking my permit. Angela said the board cannot revoke a city permit, and if they are holding a meeting tonight, they violated the 72-hour notice rule under the open meetings law. I said, what if it is an executive session? Angela said executive sessions are only allowed for personnel, contracts, and litigation, not permit disputes. So if they meet tonight without notice, the meeting is void, and any vote is unenforceable. I called the management company and asked if there was a board meeting tonight. They said no, the next meeting is in 2 weeks. I asked if Barbara can call an emergency meeting without notice. They said no, not without board president approval, and the president is out of town until Friday. I called Barbara back. She did not answer. I left a message. I said the management company confirms there is no meeting tonight, the president is unavailable, and if you try to hold an unauthorized meeting, every decision will be void and I will file a formal complaint with the state attorney general for open meetings violations. She called back in 3 minutes. She said the meeting is canceled, but the violation notice still stands and I need to submit a cure plan by midnight. I said there is nothing to cure. The survey stake is legal, the fence is permitted, and the work is proceeding under valid approvals. She said the approvals are under review, and until the review is complete, I am working at my own risk. I said the review is not legitimate, you are inventing process to delay legal work, and I am documenting every step. She said document whatever you want, I have the board on my side, and you have nothing. I hung up. Miguel finished setting the first post. He checked it with a level, poured concrete, and moved to the next hole. The string line stretched tight between 2 stakes, marking the fence line. The neighbor's Spy filmed from the sidewalk. The landscape guy stood on his porch, watching. Angela stood on her front step, also watching, also filming. I felt the pressure building, not just from Barbara, but from the whole neighborhood turning into a stage where every move I made was being recorded, misinterpreted, and weaponized. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmares that end in satisfying justice. The next morning, I woke up to an email from the board president. He said he had been briefed on my fence dispute, reviewed the file, and determined that my permit was issued under incorrect assumptions and needed reevaluation. He said the board would hold a special meeting next Tuesday to review the project and vote on whether to allow it to proceed. I called him. He did not answer. I called the management company. They said the president has discretion to call special meetings, and Tuesday complies with the 72-hour notice rule. I said the permit is valid, the work is half done, and stopping now creates a safety hazard. They said the board will take that into account during the meeting. I called Angela. I told her what happened. She said the board is stalling because they know they are wrong, but they do not want to admit it publicly, so they are trying to bury the dispute in procedure until I give up or run out of money. I said I am not giving up and I am not stopping the contractor. She said good, because the moment you stop, they win, and they will do this to the next person, and the next, until no one pushes back. Miguel called. He said he got another call, this time from the board president, saying the board is reviewing the project and asking him to pause until Tuesday. I said, do not pause, the permit is valid, and the board has no authority to stop you. He said he is going to finish setting the posts today, and then wait until Tuesday to install the panels. Because if the board tries to fine him or block him from other HOA jobs, he needs to show he acted in good faith. I said I understand. Just finish the posts and we will deal with the panels after the meeting. Miguel set 6 posts by noon. The string line stayed up, marking the full fence run. Barbara drove past twice, slowing each time, staring. She did not stop. The neighbor spy walked past 3 times, filming. Angela filmed him filming. By 2 in the afternoon, the posts were set, the concrete was curing, and Miguel packed up his tools. He said he would be back Wednesday morning to hang the panels, assuming the board meeting Tuesday does not blow everything up. I thanked him and he left. I spent the weekend preparing for the meeting. I printed the permit, the surveyor report, the original HOA approval, the email thread with Barbara, Angela's recording, and a timeline that showed every interaction. I wrote a statement that summarized the facts, cited the relevant covenants, and requested the board affirm the permit and stop the harassment. I practiced delivering it in under 3 minutes. I did not sleep much. Monday morning, I got a demand letter from Barbara. She said the board requires proof that the fence height complies with the approved plans, and the proof must be submitted in a format certified by a licensed engineer, not a contractor or surveyor. I called the surveyor. I asked if he could certify the height. He said he already did. The report includes elevation measurements, and that is what engineers use. I asked if he could write a 1-page letter confirming the fence will be 5 feet 6 inches at the highest point. He said sure, he would send it by end of day. The letter arrived at 4. I forwarded it to Barbara and the board president. Barbara replied in 10 minutes. She said the letter is not acceptable because the surveyor is not a structural engineer, and height compliance requires structural certification. I replied and said height compliance is a surveying function, not a structural function, and the covenants do not require structural certification for fences under 6 feet. She replied and said the board interprets the covenants, not me, and the interpretation is that all vertical structures require structural certification if a board member requests it. I called Angela. I said Barbara is inventing requirements that do not exist. Angela said that is her standard move. She did it to me when I replaced my mailbox. She will keep doing it until you force a vote and make the rest of the board go on record. I said I am forcing a vote tomorrow. Angela said good, I will be there, and I am bringing copies of the open meetings complaints I filed before. Because if they try to close the meeting or limit public comment, I am walking out and filing a new complaint that night. Tuesday arrived. The meeting was scheduled for 7 at the community center. I got there at 6:45. Angela was already there, sitting in the front row, with a folder and her phone. 3 other residents sat in the back. The board members filed in at 6:55. The president sat in the middle. Barbara sat on his right. The treasurer and secretary sat on the left. 2 empty seats remained for absent members. The president called the meeting to order, read the agenda, and said we would start with old business, then move to new business, and my fence dispute was listed under new business. Old business took 30 minutes. Budget amendments, landscaping bids, pool maintenance schedules. I sat there watching the clock, feeling my pulse climb. Barbara glanced at me twice, smiling. The president finally said we are moving to new business. First item is the fence permit dispute at Lot 47, and he asked me to come forward and present my case. I walked to the front, stood at the podium, and started reading my statement. I got through 2 sentences before Barbara interrupted. She said the statement is too long, the board does not have time for speeches, and I need to summarize in 1 sentence. The president said, "Barbara, let him finish. We set aside 15 minutes for this." Barbara said 15 minutes is too much, we all read the file, we know the issue, and we do not need a lecture. The president said the homeowner has a right to present his case, that is in the bylaws, so please hold your comments until he is done. I continued. I explained the permit, the surveyor report, the original approval, the timeline, the harassment, the invented requirements. I cited the covenants. I showed the email thread. I played 10 seconds of Angela's recording where Barbara said she would bury me in notices. The room went quiet. The president asked Barbara if she said that. Barbara said the recording is taken out of context and does not reflect the full conversation. Angela stood up and said I have the full recording, it is 12 minutes long, and I am happy to play it right now. The president said that will not be necessary. The board will review the recording later. I finished my statement and returned to my seat. The president asked Barbara to respond. Barbara stood and said the issue is not whether the permit is valid. The issue is whether the homeowner followed HOA procedures, and he did not, because he failed to attend the variance hearing, failed to provide structural certification, and failed to notify the board before starting work. I stood and said I notified the board in writing. I attended every hearing I was invited to except the one she scheduled on a day I told her I was unavailable, and there is no structural certification requirement in the covenants. Barbara said the covenants give the board discretion to impose additional requirements when necessary to protect neighborhood aesthetics and safety. I said discretion does not mean unlimited authority, and inventing requirements after the fact to block approved work is not discretion. It is harassment. The president said both of you need to calm down. We are not going to solve this by arguing. The board will deliberate and vote. The treasurer asked if the city permit is still valid. I said yes. He asked if the surveyor confirmed the height. I said yes, and I submitted the certification letter yesterday. Barbara said the letter is not valid because the surveyor is not a structural engineer. The treasurer said I do not see a structural requirement in the covenants. Where is that coming from? Barbara said it is implied in the design review authority. The treasurer said implied is not the same as required, and if we start requiring structural certification for every fence, we are going to get sued. The secretary asked if there are any other complaints about the fence. The president said yes, there is a complaint about the survey stake being a visual nuisance. Angela stood and said survey stakes are required by law, and removing them is tampering with a legal survey. The president said we are not talking about removing them, we are talking about relocating them. Angela said relocating them defeats the purpose. They mark the legal line, and moving them creates liability for the HOA if the fence ends up in the wrong place. Barbara said the HOA has its own survey from 2 years ago, and it shows the property line 3 feet different from the current survey. I said 2 feet, not 3, and the current survey is certified and recorded with the county, so it supersedes any older survey. Barbara said surveys are not binding, and the HOA has the right to rely on its own records. The treasurer said, Barbara, surveys are absolutely binding, that is the whole point of recording them, and if we ignore a recorded survey, we are opening ourselves up to liability. The president said we are getting off track. The question is whether to allow the fence to proceed or require additional review. The secretary said, I think we should allow it. The permit is valid, the survey is recorded, and we do not have a legal basis to stop it. Barbara said we have a design review basis. The homeowner did not follow procedure, and if we let this go, every homeowner is going to skip procedure and do whatever they want. The treasurer said skipping procedure would be starting without a permit, and he has a permit, so what procedure did he skip? Barbara said the variance hearing. The treasurer said he notified us he could not attend, and we held the hearing anyway. That is on us, not him. Barbara said he should have rescheduled. The treasurer said he requested a reschedule, and you denied it. I have the email. Barbara went quiet. The president said, Barbara, is that true? Barbara said the email was vague and did not propose a specific date, so I treated it as a soft request, not a formal reschedule. The treasurer said that is not what the bylaws say. The bylaws say any request to reschedule must be honored if made more than 48 hours in advance, and his request was made 5 days in advance. The president asked to see the email. I pulled my phone, opened the thread, and handed it to him. He read it, passed it to the treasurer, and said this clearly requests a reschedule and proposes 2 alternate dates. Barbara said the dates were not feasible. The president said then you should have proposed different dates, not held the hearing without him. Barbara said I was acting in the board's interest to keep the project on schedule. The treasurer said the project is on schedule, he got his permit, the survey is done, the posts are set, and the only thing delaying it is us. Angela stood again and said, I want to address the open meetings violation. The president said, what violation? Angela said this board held an executive session 3 weeks ago to discuss this fence dispute, and executive sessions are not allowed for permit disputes, only for personnel, contracts, and litigation. The president said we did not hold an executive session. Angela said I have a witness who saw the board members enter the community center conference room after the regular meeting ended, and the doors were closed for 40 minutes and no minutes were published. The president looked at Barbara. Barbara said that was not an executive session, it was an informal discussion. Angela said informal discussions are not allowed under the open meetings law. All board discussions must be public unless they fall under an exemption, and permit disputes do not fall under any exemption. The president said we did not vote on anything, so it does not matter. Angela said the law does not require a vote, it prohibits closed discussions, and if you discuss the fence dispute without public access, you violated the statute. The room went silent. The president said we will take that under advisement. Angela said I am not asking you to take it under advisement. I am telling you that I am filing a complaint with the state attorney general tomorrow if you do not publicly reverse any decisions made during that closed discussion. The treasurer said I was not at that meeting. What decisions were made? Barbara said no decisions, just a preliminary review of the facts. The treasurer said if it was just a preliminary review, then there should be no problem reversing it and starting fresh. The president said let us take a 5-minute recess. The board members stood and walked into a side room. Angela leaned over and said they are panicking, they know they are exposed, and they are going to vote to approve your fence just to make this go away. I said what about Barbara? Angela said Barbara is going to lose, and she is going to be furious, and you need to be ready for her to escalate outside the meeting. The board came back. The president said the board has reviewed the facts and determined that the homeowner has met all requirements, the permit is valid, and the fence may proceed as planned. He asked for a vote. The treasurer and secretary voted yes. 2 absent members were marked as abstaining. Barbara voted no. The motion passed 3-1. The president said the meeting is adjourned. I stood. Angela stood. We walked out. Barbara followed us into the parking lot. She said you think you won, but you did not. Because I am going to make sure every inspector, every contractor, and every vendor in this neighborhood knows you are a problem, and no one is going to want to work with you. I turned and said that is defamation, and if you follow through, I will sue you personally, not just the board. She said good luck proving it. I said I do not need luck, I have recordings, I have emails, and I have witnesses, and the next time you threaten me, I am going to file a restraining order. She walked to her car and drove off. Angela said she is going to do something I do not know what, but she is not done. I said I know. I went home. I called Miguel and told him the board approved the fence. He said he would be there Wednesday morning to hang the panels. I said good, let us finish this before she finds another angle. Wednesday morning Miguel arrived at 7:30. He unloaded the fence panels, lined them up along the posts, and started hanging the first one. I stood on the porch with coffee and watched. The neighbor spy walked past, filming again. Miguel ignored him. By 9, the first 3 panels were up, and the fence was starting to take shape. By 10, we had 5 panels. By 11, the whole run was done except for the gate. Barbara showed up at 11:15. She parked on the street, got out, and walked onto my property. Miguel saw her coming and stopped. She walked up to the fence, pulled a tape measure from her cardigan pocket, and started measuring the height of the panels. I walked down from the porch and said, "You are on my property without permission, you need to leave." She ignored me and kept measuring. I said, "I am asking you to leave. If you do not leave, I am calling the police." She said I have a right to inspect HOA property for compliance. I said this is not HOA property, this is my property, and you have no right to be here. She finished measuring and said the fence is 6 feet 1 inch, which is 7 inches over the limit, and I am filing a violation notice right now. I said the surveyor certified the height at 5 feet 6 inches, and if your tape measure says different, your tape measure is wrong. She said my tape measure is calibrated and certified, and your surveyor is lying to protect you. I pulled my phone and called the surveyor. I put it on speaker. I asked him to confirm the height. He said the height is measured from grade, which varies across the property, and the highest point is 5 feet 6 inches, which complies with the 6-foot limit, and if someone is measuring 6 feet 1 inch, they are measuring from the wrong reference point. Barbara said the surveyor is wrong. The surveyor said I am a licensed professional, my measurements are submitted to the county, and if you disagree, you can hire your own surveyor and file a competing report. But unless you do that, my measurements stand. Barbara hung up on him. She turned to me and said I am filing a complaint with the county zoning office. I said go ahead, they are going to tell you the same thing the surveyor just told you. She walked back to her car, got in, and drove off. Miguel said she is going to keep coming back. I said I know, but the fence is legal, and eventually she is going to run out of angles. He finished hanging the gate, installed the latch, tested the swing, and said the job is done. I paid him, thanked him, and he packed up his tools. He said if the HOA gives you more trouble, call me. I will come back and testify if you need it. I said I appreciate it. I went inside and sent a follow-up email to the board president, summarizing the Tuesday vote, attaching photos of the completed fence, and requesting confirmation that the project is closed. He replied in an hour and said the project is approved and closed, and any further complaints would need to be filed through the standard process. I forwarded the email to Barbara. She did not reply. The next morning I got a call from the county zoning office. A zoning officer said he received a complaint about my fence height and needed to schedule an inspection. I said the fence is permitted, surveyed, and approved by the HOA. He said he still needs to inspect because the complaint alleges a code violation. I said fine, when do you want to come? He said he could come that afternoon. I said I will be here. He arrived at 2. He walked the fence line with a measuring tape and a digital level. He checked the survey stakes. He checked the permit. He measured the height at 3 points. He said the fence is compliant, the measurements are accurate, and there is no violation. I asked if he could put that in writing. He said he would send a letter to the homeowner and copy the HOA. I thanked him. He left. Barbara called my phone an hour later. She said the zoning officer is wrong and she is appealing his decision. I said there is no appeal process for zoning inspections. The officer makes the determination and that is final, unless there is new evidence. She said she has new evidence. I said, what evidence? She said a neighbor statement that says the fence is taller than it was before. I said the old fence was rotted and leaning. Of course the new fence looks taller, but the actual height is measured from grade, not from visual perception. She said visual perception matters for neighborhood harmony, and she is going to file a formal complaint with the board. I said the board already approved the fence, the vote was 3-1, and the project is closed. She said the board can reopen any decision if new evidence is presented. I said there is no new evidence. You were just recycling the same complaint with different words. She said we will see what the board says at the next meeting. I said fine, I will be there, and I will bring the zoning officer's letter, the surveyor report, and Angela's recording of you threatening to bury me in notices. She hung up. I called Angela and told her Barbara is trying to reopen the case. Angela said she cannot. The vote is final, and the bylaws do not allow reopening unless there is fraud or new material evidence, and a neighbor's visual perception is not material evidence. I said I know, but she is going to try anyway. Angela said let her try. The board is not going to side with her again, not after the open meetings threat, and if she keeps pushing, the treasurer is going to move to remove her from the design review committee. The next board meeting was 2 weeks later. I showed up with the zoning letter, the surveyor report, and a printed transcript of the recording. Barbara was already there, sitting in the front row, with a folder of her own. The board members filed in. The president called the meeting to order and moved through the agenda. When we got to new business, Barbara stood and said she wanted to reopen the fence dispute at Lot 47 based on new evidence. The president said what new evidence? Barbara said she had a sworn neighbor statement with photos that showed the fence is taller than the approved height. The president asked to see the statement. She handed it over. He read it, passed it to the treasurer, and said this statement says the fence looks taller, but it does not include any measurements, so how is this evidence of a code violation? Barbara said visual evidence is admissible. The treasurer said visual evidence is subjective. The zoning officer measured the fence and found it compliant, and unless you have measurements that contradict his, there is no basis to reopen. Barbara said the board has a duty to investigate complaints. The president said the board also has a duty not to relitigate closed cases without cause, and this is not cause. Barbara said I am requesting a formal vote to reopen. The treasurer said I am not voting to reopen. The case is closed, the fence is legal, and we have better things to do. The secretary agreed. The president said the motion to reopen fails for lack of support. Barbara sat down. Angela stood and said I would like to address the open meetings violation from the March executive session. The president said we already addressed that. Angela said no, you said you would take it under advisement, but you never issued a public statement or reversed the decision. So I am formally requesting that the board adopt a resolution affirming that all future fence disputes will be discussed in public session. The treasurer said I support that. The secretary said I do too. The president said fine, we will adopt that resolution. Is there any objection? Barbara said I object. Executive sessions are necessary for sensitive discussions. The treasurer said fence heights are not sensitive. They are public record. And if we keep closing meetings, we are going to lose in court. The president called for a vote. The resolution passed 3-1. Angela sat down. The president moved to adjourn. Barbara stood and said I am resigning from the design review committee effective immediately. The room went silent. The president said you do not need to do that. Barbara said I do, because this board does not respect my judgment and I am not going to waste my time being overruled. She picked up her folder and walked out. The president adjourned the meeting. I walked out with Angela. She said that went better than expected. I said Barbara is going to retaliate. Angela said maybe, but she does not have a platform anymore, and the board is done covering for her, so whatever she does is going to be on her own, and that means she has no protection. The next week I got a letter from a law firm representing Barbara. The letter said I had defamed her during the board meeting by accusing her of harassment, and she was demanding a public apology and $5,000 in damages. I called a lawyer. The lawyer read the letter and said it is a SLAPP suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation, and it has no merit because everything you said at the meeting is protected speech under the First Amendment. He said he could respond with a motion to dismiss and a request for attorney fees, and Barbara would likely drop it once she realized she was going to lose and pay my legal costs. He sent the response. Barbara's lawyer did not reply. 2 weeks later, I got a notice that the lawsuit was withdrawn. The lawyer said she probably got advice that she could not win and did not want to pay my fees. I asked if I could countersue. He said I could, but it would cost more than it is worth, and the best revenge is that she is off the board and the HOA is adopting new rules that prevent her tactics from working on anyone else. A month later, the board sent out a newsletter. It announced new enforcement policies, including a requirement that all violation notices include photo evidence, a 7-day cure period, and a formal hearing before fines are assessed. It also announced that the board had adopted an enforcement checklist that limits board member discretion and requires design review decisions to follow a written rubric. The newsletter did not mention Barbara by name, but everyone knew the rules were written because of her. Angela stopped by one afternoon and said she heard Barbara moved out of the neighborhood. I said, really? Angela said her house went up for sale last week, and the listing agent told someone at the grocery store that Barbara wanted a fresh start. I said good for her. Angela said good for everyone. I walked out to the backyard and looked at the fence. It was straight, solid, and exactly where it was supposed to be. The gate swung smooth, the latch clicked, the posts were plumb. The survey stakes were gone, pulled after the final inspection, but the line they marked was still there, buried in the ground, recorded with the county, permanent. I got a check in the mail 2 weeks later. It was from the HOA management company. The memo line said refund of improperly assessed fines. The amount was $450, every dollar Barbara had tried to charge me, plus administrative fees, returned in one payment that hit the ledger like a slap. I deposited it and sent a thank you email to the board president. He replied and said the board reviewed the enforcement history and found multiple procedural errors, and they were working to refund other homeowners who had been fined under similar circumstances. He said the board was committed to fair and transparent enforcement going forward. I saw Barbara's neighbor spy at the grocery store a month later. He did not make eye contact. I heard from Angela that he had been told by the new board that filming neighbors without cause was considered harassment under the updated rules, and if he did it again, he would face a complaint himself. Angela said he stopped filming. The neighborhood got quieter. The board meetings got shorter. The violation notices dropped. People started fixing things without fear that every improvement would trigger a fight. The fence stayed up, the posts stayed straight, and every time I walked past it, I remembered the survey stake, the label maker, the tape measure, the meeting ambush, and the moment Barbara said she would bury me in notices until I ran out of printer ink, and how that line came back to haunt her when the board played the recording and realized they had been covering for someone who was more interested in control than community. I ran into the treasurer at the coffee shop a few months later. He said the board had quietly settled 2 other complaints against Barbara for similar harassment, and the legal fees had come out of the reserve fund, and the board was considering a bylaw change to allow removal of board members for conduct violations. He said the change would not be retroactive, but it would prevent future Barbaras from lasting as long as she did. I asked how the new design review process was working. He said it was working great, applications were getting approved faster, fewer disputes, fewer complaints, and the committee was actually focused on design instead of enforcement. He said it turned out that when you remove the people who treat rules as weapons, the rules start working the way they are supposed to. I thought about calling Barbara to tell her the fence was still standing, the board had reversed her policies, and the neighborhood was better without her, but I did not. There was no point. She knew. The refund of fees, the board resolution, the enforcement checklist, the resignation, the lawsuit withdrawal, the move, all of it told the story better than I could. She had spent years building a system where she could intimidate homeowners into submission. And in the end, the system turned on her, not because I was smarter or louder, but because I stayed polite, documented everything, and let her own words destroy her credibility. The city sent a follow-up inspection 6 months later. The inspector walked the fence, checked the posts, confirmed the height, and signed off on the final permit. He said the fence met all codes, the installation was professional, and the project was closed. I asked if the HOA could reopen the complaint. He said no. Once the city signs off, the city determination is final, and the HOA cannot override it. I thanked him. He left. I stood in the backyard and looked at the fence one more time. It was just a fence, 6 feet of wood and concrete, separating my yard from the easement, keeping the dog in, keeping the noise out, doing exactly what a fence is supposed to do. But it was also proof that you can fight an HOA and win, as long as you follow the process, document everything, and refuse to give up when the people in charge try to bury you in paperwork and threats. Angela stopped by that evening with a bottle of wine. She said she heard the city closed your file. I said they did. She said, "Good, you earned it." We sat on the back deck and looked at the fence. She said she was thinking about running for the board in the next election. I said, "You should. The neighborhood needs people who actually care about the rules instead of using them as weapons." She said, "Maybe. We will see." The sun set. The fence cast a long shadow across the yard. The gate latch gleamed in the last light. Somewhere down the street a dog barked. A car started. A door closed. The neighborhood went on, quieter now, less paranoid, less afraid, because one person had pushed back and the system had finally responded. I thought about the survey stake, the one Barbara had screamed about, the one she said was intimidation, the one that marked the line between her authority and reality. It was gone now, pulled after the inspection, but the line it marked was still there, invisible but permanent, a reminder that property rights are not negotiable, no matter how loud someone yells or how many notices they print. Keep your cool, and I will see you next time.